Rubber belts are the best way to transfer power from the crankshaft to different auxiliary components, and in most cases, the camshafts as well. A modern car can have 3 different belts each with its own tensioner, so you'll need to be precise if you want to figure out which one is the problem. A chirping noise and constant squealing after you start the car are the 2 primary symptoms of a bad belt tensioner. Along with squealing, you might notice a burning rubber smell. Humming or whirring is also common when the tensioner bearing fails. And if the auxiliary belt tensioner is bad, you will notice different problems with the electrical system, AC, and power steering. Symptoms of a bad belt tensioner: chirping noise. A chirping noise or intermittent squealing is a sign that one of the belt pulleys is seizing up or that the bearing has side-to-side play. The cause of this in most cases is the idler pulley or the belt tensioner pulley. When the pulley has play, it vibrates left and right, and each time it does, the belt slips over it and squeals. Since this happens extremely quickly, it makes a chirping noise instead of a constant squeal. If this is what you notice, the most important part is diagnosing from which pulley the noise is coming from. Since the noise is fairly loud, that shouldn't be a problem. Just make sure not to push your hands or lower your head too much into the belt system. Squealing noise. A constant squealing noise usually means the idler pulley or the tensioner pulley is completely seized. It could also be that the bearing has so much rolling resistance that the pulley is spinning considerably slower than the belt, which causes slipping and squealing. If you notice that the noise is coming from one single pulley, then that is what's happening. But if the noise seems to be coming from every pulley or the noise seems to be moving around the engine bay, there is a chance that the belt tensioner has collapsed. That means the belt isn't tight enough and isn't making enough traction over the pulleys. That causes it to slip on virtually every pulley it passes over. Smell of burning rubber. A smell of burning rubber means the belt is overheating, and this smell is almost always accompanied by chirping or squealing. If you notice the burning smell, it means the belt has been slipping for so long that it's starting to melt from all the friction. It also means that the belt will snap shortly after, so it's a good idea to visit a repair shop right away. The chances of a fire are low, but if the belt snaps, you will lose power steering in the middle of driving, which can be extremely dangerous. On the other hand, if the timing belt is the one that's slipping and it snaps, the pistons will hit the valves. That means you will have to replace the entire engine because repairing it will be way more expensive. Humming or whirring noise. A humming or whirring noise is a sign that the tensioner or idler pulley bearing is worn out. The humming is one of the early symptoms of a bad tensioner bearing, and the noise isn't that loud. You will only hear the humming when you open the hood. It's also often fairly difficult to notice which pulley is making the humming noise. If you can't figure it out, you can buy a mechanic's stethoscope. You just touch the engine block near each pulley, and whichever one makes a noticeable humming or grinding, that's the one. It's worth mentioning that if humming is the only symptom, you don't have to hurry to get it replaced. A lot of car owners drive their cars with a humming tensioner pulley for hundreds of miles without any issues, and a small number of owners even notice the humming until the belt starts squealing. Various electrical problems. The auxiliary belt runs the alternator in pretty much all cars. If the tensioner isn't putting enough pressure on the belt, it will start to slip over the alternator pulley. That means the alternator output isn't as high as it should be. This will trigger a red battery warning light. The lights will become dim, infotainment will start to glitch, and you might get other warning lights as well. If you keep driving long enough, the car will stall eventually because it's running on the battery alone. And even if it doesn't stall, chances are high that the battery won't have enough charge to start the engine again. Power steering issues. The auxiliary belt also powers the power steering pump in most cars. This may not be the case if you drive a car made in the last 10 years because it likely has electric steering, but for all other cars, this is a common symptom. What you will notice is that the steering is heavier than it normally is. You might also notice that the steering is light, but as you turn it, it suddenly becomes heavy. That happens because the power steering pump load is higher the more you turn the steering wheel. If the belt tensioner is bad, the belt will start slipping only at a certain point when the load increases. It also often happens that the belt starts slightly squealing when you turn the steering wheel to full lock. AC, blowing warm air. In most cars, the auxiliary belt that powers the alternator and power steering pump also powers the AC compressor. Since the AC compressor isn't spinning when the AC is off, there might not be enough load on the belt to cause slipping. But when you turn the AC on and the compressor engages, it could start slipping over the compressor pulley. That underdrives the compressor and reduces the AC performance. This results in warm air blowing into the cabin, and possibly belt squeal only when the AC is on. The same is true if the AC has a separate belt and tensioner, with the only difference being that it's a bit cheaper to replace. Cost to replace an auxiliary belt tensioner. Replacing the auxiliary belt tensioner alone is not recommended. That's why the tensioner usually comes as a kit and includes a new belt and a new idler pulley. The tensioner is what makes up 80% of the cost, so it only makes sense to put everything together. These kits cost between $50 and $200 at AutoZone, with the average price being around $100. As for labor, it takes anywhere between 1 and 3 hours to replace all the pulleys and the belt. That largely depends on how complicated the vehicle is and how many surrounding components have to be removed to get access. The older and cheaper your car is, the simpler the replacement will be. That puts the average cost to replace the tensioner at around $120, with $80 on the low end and $300 on the high end. Cost to replace a timing belt tensioner. The timing belt is one of the most important parts of the engine. As we mentioned earlier, if the timing belt snaps, it means a new engine. However, replacing the timing belt tensioner alone is not uncommon since the belt has really long replacement intervals. A new tensioner will set you back between $80 and $150 without the belt or any other components. Replacing it usually takes around 1 and 3 hours, as it does for the auxiliary belt tensioner. That's $100 to $300 in labor. But if the tensioner caused the timing belt to squeal, it's a good idea to replace the belt as well. The belt alone costs about $20 to $50 and adds another half hour or 1 hour to replacement time. And if you opt to get a full timing belt kit with all the idler pulleys, belt, tensioner, and water pump, expect to pay around $200 to $300 for parts alone. The labor will also be more expensive at $400 to $800. How to replace an auxiliary belt tensioner. Step-by-step guide. 1. Remove surrounding parts that block access to the tensioner. The auxiliary belt is on the side of the engine in front-wheel drive cars, or on the front of the engine in rear-wheel drive cars. If it's on the side, you will have to jack up the vehicle and remove all the plastic covers under it to get access. And if the belt is on the front of the engine, in some cases, you will have to remove the radiator fan and possibly the plastic cover under it to get access from the bottom. 2. Release pressure off the belt and remove it. To remove the auxiliary belt, you first have to release the tension. If the tensioner is collapsed, this won't be a problem because the belt is already loose. Otherwise, put a wrench on the center bolt on the tensioner pulley and put pressure on it to pull it away from the belt. While holding the pressure on the tensioner, slip the belt off. 3. Remove the tensioner and idler pulley. Once the belt is out, it's time to remove the tensioner and the idler pulley if it's included in the kit. The tensioner is held in place with 3 or 4 bolts that are pretty easy to remove. The idler pulley is held in place by 2 or 3 bolts, also easy to remove. You can't go wrong with orientation when installing the new tensioner and idler. 4. Install the new belt. When installing the new belt, it's crucial to remember how it was sitting before. You can easily find auxiliary belt diagrams on Google for virtually any car or engine, so you can check that just to make sure. You can also snap a picture before you remove the belt. You want to install the belt over all the pulleys except the tensioner. Once you get to the tensioner, use the same method as before to pull it away from the belt and release tension once the belt is in place to secure it. Assemble everything back together and run the car for a few minutes while looking at the belt to make sure it's seated properly. To summarize what we talked about in this video, in the end, the main symptoms of a bad belt tensioner are strange noises coming from the engine bay like chirping, squealing, or humming. Each of those is usually a sign that the tensioner pulley is seizing up, that it has play, or that the bearing is bad. But these can also indicate a bad idler pulley. But if you notice that the steering is heavier, that the AC doesn't work properly, or that the battery warning light is popping up, it's usually a clear sign that either the belt tensioner is bad or that the belt itself is damaged. I hope this video helped. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and follow so you don't miss any of my videos.